All right, welcome everyone. Welcome and good evening. My name is Brian Gutierrez, and thank you for joining us tonight. It's my pleasure to host this evening's Expert Insights webinar, Making the Leap: What to Know Before Transitioning into the Nonprofit Sector. So before we get started, I want to say a few words about who we are at UW Continuum. So UW Continuum College, believe it or not, has been around for over a century. It was established in 1912, and our role is to expand the University of Washington's impact by meeting learners where they are in life and helping them get to where they want to go. And we do that by offering relevant, flexible educational experiences, the right programs for the right people at the right time. And our goal is to make sure anyone can access the knowledge and the opportunities they need through the University of Washington and use that to make a greater impact in their work and ultimately in the world. So within Continuum College is our professional and continuing education unit, where we offer a wide range of options: certificates, degrees, and individual courses. You have built-in professional networks and hands-on experiences. The idea is to make it possible for people to learn anything from anywhere. So whether someone wants to update their skills, explore a brand new field, or take the next step in their career, there's a class for that and ultimately a clearer path forward. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Expert Insights webinar. This is a free series that brings together our instructors, who are also industry professionals, to share what's trending in their fields, the tools you'll need to succeed, and practical career advice to help you stand out in today's job market. And I'm especially excited about tonight's panel because the conversation feels quite timely. With some of the recent disruptions in the labor market and many people considering a second or even third career, and for those interested in mission-driven work, tonight's discussion will offer valuable perspectives and insights. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce our panelists for this evening. First off, we have Julie Bianchi. Julie Bianchi believes in the sweet spot between big picture thinking and the details, and this is where successful fundraising strategy is born. Her experience in fundraising and board leadership over the past decade is the underpinning for her practical and creative approach to consulting and teaching. Bianchi leans on generative questions with her clients to help reveal new paths forward to long-term fundraising success. She has significant fundraising campaign experience across all areas of the nonprofit sector, with fundraising goals from $1 million to $300 million. Bianchi is also committed to investing in the future of the fundraising profession. As a founding board member of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, Advancement Northwest Chapter, she's a certified fundraising executive and earned a certificate in fundraising management from the University of Washington. Bianchi teaches emerging nonprofit leaders as a member of the adjunct faculty in the Masters of Nonprofit Leadership program at Seattle University, and the University of Washington Certificate in Fundraising Management, as well as the specialization in grant writing. Ann Mace-Dines serves as the Chief Financial Officer at Public Health Advocates, where she leads finance, administration, and human resources. In her role, she manages diverse revenue streams from federal to state, local, and foundation sources to support the organization's mission of promoting health equity and social justice. More than 20 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, Dines has specialized in designing back-end workflows that enhance organizational capacity for growth. She holds a master's degree in business administration with a specialization in accounting from the University of Texas at San Antonio. And we have Sarah Levin. Sarah Levin is proud of her 3-year decade career in nonprofit and public sector service in Seattle. In government and nonprofit philanthropy roles, she led teams supporting cross-sector and community efforts to address homelessness, poverty, and education inequities. In early 2023, Sarah jumped into the world of consulting and teaching. She founded Ardia Strategies to bring her facilitation and planning skills to mission-driven organizations. Levin also joined the UW Evans School of Public Policy and Governance as a distinguished practitioner, living out her dream of teaching students who believe in the power of public and nonprofit service. Before consulting and teaching, Sarah was Chief Impact Officer at United Way of King County. For 10 years, she led United Way's grant making, direct service, public policy, and volunteer engagement strategies. Prior to that, Sarah worked in the City of Seattle Budget Office and Human Services Department. Early in her career, Sarah was a direct service provider in Seattle area nonprofits. She's a 2004 Leadership Tomorrow graduate, chairs Leadership Tomorrow's board of directors, and is a board member for the King County Sexual Assault Resource Center. Sarah holds a master's in public administration from the UW's Evans School of Public Policy and Governance. Welcome to the three of you. Thank you for joining us tonight. So with that, tonight's format, I will pose 4 questions to each of the panelists about the nonprofit sector, and this will be followed by a Q&A. We'll hold all questions to that time, so please feel free to pose your questions to the panel or a specific panelist by entering your question in the Q&A portion of your Zoom tool. And so with that, we'll get started. So question number 1, can you describe how you entered the nonprofit sector and what drew you to it? So first off, Anne, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, thanks, Brian. My sophomore year of college, I applied to be a part-time volunteer coordinator at a local nonprofit. During the interview, the team learned I was majoring in accounting and asked if I had considering applying for their part-time bookkeeper job. I explained that I hadn't finished my degree and it was a requirement of their listing. They asked me if I knew what Gap was, and when I said it was more than a store, they hired me right then. And so thus began my career in nonprofit. I Later, my husband was active duty military. We traveled a lot and moved around a lot, and I wound up working for Boeing for a while and realized that that was just not my jam. And I really wanted to give back to the community that I was in. And nonprofit accounting is a very weird. Very weird. You get half of one semester to learn it, and just doing it and working in the community. I actually was the chief financial officer of KSARC, so King County Sexual Assault Resource Center, for 6 years. And it was really one of the best places that I've had. I've been at One America Immigration Advocacy. I'm currently at Public Health Advocates. I've been in domestic violence, and just what you can get from those personally helps fill the cup that we have. So thanks.
That's great. Julie, how about you?
Yeah, so similar in some ways to Anne, I kind of wandered my way into nonprofit. I grew up in a small town, and volunteering and service was a way of life. So I had a really vague idea that I wanted to work in nonprofits, but I didn't really know what that meant until I went off to college. And I was at a university that really emphasized community-based service as part of the curriculum. So that led me to my first job out of college, working for the Arthritis Foundation in Seattle on the programmatic side, but I quickly realized that I should become a fundraiser because I saw that we couldn't run any of the programs that we were running for kids with arthritis without funding. So suddenly I was fundraising for them. And that led me to signing up for the UW fundraising certificate program because I was fundraising and I didn't know how to fundraise, which is a common story, learning on the job. So I went through the certificate program and figured out all the key pieces that I needed to know to get started in the fundraising field. And then because of that networking that I did in the program, and then was also really involved with the Association of Fundraising Professionals in Seattle, that led me to my first real job in fundraising at the Collins Group, which was a well-known fundraising consulting firm in Seattle that specialized in campaign consulting. It's now known as Campbell and Company. And I learned everything that I know about campaign and consulting there with a lot of the who became the national leaders in the field. So I was a very young consultant without a lot of on-the-ground fundraising experience. So then I decided I needed more education, mostly because I like to be in school, but went on to earn a master's degree in nonprofit leadership. So that helped me to kind of bolster my credibility as a relatively new fundraising consultant. But now I've been fundraising in the consulting field for 15 years, and I'm currently helping to build Cloud Bake Collective. We're a Northwest-based independent collection of consultants specializing in campaigns, grant writing, and fundraising for organizations of all sizes. So I'm really just a big nerd who loves to talk about fundraising. So I look for new ways to do it all the time, either teaching it or consulting. And so that's why I'm still teaching at UW today.
That's great. Thanks so much. Sarah, what about you?
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. And I love hearing people's stories. And I have some similarities to Julie and Ann's stories. So I also, after college, in the early 1990s, I was a Russian literature and language major in college. And I finished college. And of course, my mother was like, what are you going to do with that degree that you just got? The power of the liberal arts education. And I ended up coming to Seattle and immediately got a job, actually, where I was able to speak Russian and work in a nonprofit that was serving Russian refugees who were coming to Seattle at the time. And I had always grown up with service and nonprofits kind of in my blood in many ways, but to actually get to be working in one as my first real job was pretty incredible. It was really, really hard work. It was direct service work with very vulnerable folks who had just arrived in this country, and I was able to speak their language and relate to them culturally in many ways. And it really sort of sparked my love for the ways in which nonprofits can help people, particularly human services nonprofits. So I did more direct service work. And then probably like both Anne and Julie, I realized that I probably needed to further my education to sort of get to the career level that I was hoping for in the nonprofit sector. And I ended up going to the Evans School at UW, and I got a master in public administration, but I had a specialty in nonprofit management. And another one of those moments of finishing school, and I had sort of two paths in front of me. I was offered a job that was exactly what I went to school to get at a small nonprofit, but I would have been the number one at a small nonprofit. And then I was offered an opportunity to go do a temporary position working with the city of Seattle. And I actually ended up doing the pivot that I didn't think I was going to do. And I worked at the city of Seattle for 13 years. And what was really interesting about that is I ended up in the human services department, which was a really massive funder of community nonprofits across Seattle. And it was a great opportunity for me to work with nonprofits in the community and help sort of make government more accessible to them, government funding, other government resources. And so I did that for quite a while. I then decided that I wanted to get back into a different role in the nonprofit world. And I ended up at United Way of King County in the Chief Impact Officer role, where I got to be, again, a funder of nonprofits, but we were also at United Way was a direct service provider. I got to work with the private sector, the public sector, all of the amazing nonprofits that we partnered with, and really help try to make a difference on some of the biggest challenges facing Seattle at the time. So did that for 10 years and then decided that it was the point in my life and my career where I was really ready to step out of the traditional sort of leadership role and try my hand at both consulting and teaching. And consulting, the type of consulting I do has an element of teaching to it. So I got to be part of the nonprofit certificate program at UW. I teach management in public and nonprofit entities at the Evans School at UW, and really get to bring all of my passion for nonprofits, my passion for working cross-sector and figuring out how the public and private and nonprofit sectors can really work together to do good. And I get to bring all of that now in a different way to the students and the clients that I work with.
That's great. Thanks so much for all those just great stories. So let's think. Question number 2, what are the key challenges and rewards of working in the nonprofit sector? And then Sarah, would you start us off?
Yeah, and when I was thinking about this question, one thing I wanted to make sure I said is, nonprofit sector, those two words are actually fairly general. And so I know for me, when I think about the typical nonprofit, because of my professional experience, it's going to be a human services nonprofit. It's going to be a nonprofit delivering services to people in need. But the nonprofit sector is so incredibly diverse. And I will answer the question in a second, because I do think the challenges and rewards really cross the entire sector. But the nonprofit sector, hospitals are nonprofits, universities are nonprofits, little tiny grassroots agencies that just got their 501c3 are nonprofits, and everything in between. So it is such an interesting, huge, diverse sector with these really, very unique to the sector things that sort of are common across every one of those organizations, no matter what the size. And obviously, Brian, you used this term at the very start, they're mission driven. They obviously are tax exempt. They often or usually rely on volunteers to help deliver services or do some of the work. There's always a volunteer component in nonprofits. You have a board, a nonprofit board, and you have to do, as Julie was saying, you have to do a lot of fundraising in order to help keep that nonprofit sustainable. So again, no matter what size or scope of nonprofits, thinking about the diversity in the sector, but so much commonality, no matter what the organization. And I think, I think the challenges are really, partly sorry, I'll start with rewards. I think the rewards from my perspective are the sector is so diverse, and it's diverse in terms of the type of work experience you could have, again, across any or all of those, that wide range of organizations, but it's also a really diverse sector in terms of age, in terms of background, racial, ethnic background, why people join the nonprofit sector. And that diversity in all of the nonprofit workplaces I've been in has been such an opportunity to join with mission-driven folks and have things in common and work together across potential differences or different life experiences. And I've really seen that in the nonprofit sector like I've seen it in no other. Nonprofits are really innovative, and I think that can be a reward. It's the flip side of the challenge right now of the incredible funding challenges, the very really sort of undermining that is happening at the federal level with nonprofits in terms of nonprofit status and DEI efforts and many, many things that are sort of in the soul of nonprofits are being upended at the federal level. And I think it is an opportunity for nonprofits to do something they do best, which is be really innovative. Nonprofits do more with less very often. And I think that drives an innovation that's unique to the sector. And I think the last thing I'll say, tons of really amazing things about working in the nonprofit. It's also a really hard thing right now. And I'm sure that the three of us will get to that as we answer the other questions as well. So I'll stop there.
That's really great. Yeah, thanks for that, Sarah. Anne, what about you?
So I have worked in finance in a nonprofit for most of the last 24 years, which I can tell you right now is probably one of the most stressful positions when you're watching your funding that has been relatively steady also be upended on a dime. We were a part of your grant is canceled. You have to lay these people off. Your grant is not canceled. I would say the challenges are nothing is static and everything changes. And with each new administration, everything has changed. We weathered a global pandemic in which the organization I was at provided direct care services, and we turned on a dime to have to move to Zoom for sexual assault therapy and for child therapy, which we learned wasn't great on Zoom. And just you have to be willing to learn. It's a huge challenge for us. One of the big challenges that happens in the finance department is it's different. It's a different way of doing things, and grant accounting is terrible when you start out because you want it to fit and it doesn't fit. And it's something incredibly different, and you can learn it, and it's a skill, right? It's an opportunity that you can learn and just really be good at. But at first it's not an easy transition to make. One of the things I actually love I specialize in small to medium nonprofits, is the ability to get to mentor and people who really want to be mentored. So I've had people who have started working with me, and she said, I don't want to do payroll. And 2 months later I said, congrats, that's what your new role is. And now she followed me to my current position, and she's my payroll person now. And so really just what are these things that you can do? You have a lot of leverage and a lot of leeway where you can learn a lot of new skills. And so you want to learn how to fundraise. Good on you. And you can learn how to do that when you're in a nonprofit. And most of the executives really do care. I feel like there's a different care that I have as both a manager and being managed in a nonprofit, as I see or what I felt at Boeing. Boeing felt very hard for me in the sense of I want to care about the people that are working with me, but it felt like I was always wondering who was saying what. So it felt very different. Not to say that doesn't happen, but it is something that I feel like you can get an opportunity to impact a community that you would never really have the opportunity to see or deal with. And and be a part of. So being a part of immigration advocacy during when Trump came into office the first time was a big shift for the organization. And how do we weather that? And how do we help the immigrants in our community? And now working in public health policy and those things that are happening, how are we doing that, shifting and navigating? And like Sarah said, you're creative and you have to be innovative. And so there is no ability to sit stagnant. So if you're a stagnant person, maybe this isn't for you, but if you want to move and you want to learn and you want to do, it's a really awesome opportunity and you will never be bored.
Mhm. I wholeheartedly agree. You'll never be bored. I spend my days thinking and talking about fundraising. So what really comes to me as a reward and why I keep doing this work is the relationships you make, because it's such a small world within the nonprofit sector that even if you're moving between jobs or between organizations, you're still seeing a lot of the same people. You're still collaborating with similar people over time. I see that the longer I've been in this sector. You have these relationships that follow you through your entire career, and that part feels really special, and those connections follow you everywhere. I think the other reward, especially for me, I'm in my consulting role. I'm kind of the wizard behind the curtain of cool things that are happening. So I get to, see something in the newspaper or see something on social media that my name's not attached to it, but I know that I was a part of it. I had one little thread of it, or one piece of it that helped to make it successful. And that ultimately is making actual tangible change in our community. So that part is really cool and really keeps me charged up. On the flip side, I would say the challenge, because I do a lot of work with smaller organizations, is the culture of scarcity in nonprofits. And this is not imagined, it's real, especially now in 2025. It's even more real. Whether I'm working with a small nonprofit or a large nonprofit, there's just more this sense that there's not enough time or people or energy or willpower to do what is absolutely necessary. And so that part can be really disheartening when you come to an organization and you're like, okay, this is a great strategy or this is a great idea. And yet people are feeling really discouraged and they're not able to pick up the great idea because they're just trying to keep the lights on or keep programs running. So that part can be challenging, but I think taking the long view on it helps. That, okay, we can't do this great idea today, but we're going to hold the thread until next year. And I get really inspired when I see organizations that are operating in that actual scarcity, but they're bringing to the table a sense of abundance and possibility. But you have to be really intentional about building that culture to see the potential in the midst of the chaos or the lack of so many things. So that's the ups and downs of it.
It's great. Yeah, thank you. How about moving on to this question? So what skills and experience transfer well, and are there any gaps to be mindful of? Julie, do you want to start us off?
Sure, yeah. So I like fundraising because you need a wide variety of skills to be successful. So it means that every day looks different, which I love. I don't like to be bored, so I echo that with what Anne said. I think being able to operate in a huge amount of ambiguity and sometimes literal chaos and make order out of it. I'm somebody who enjoys making order out of chaos. So if that's you, you're going to really thrive in the nonprofit sector. Being creative, being able to see a problem and come up with an idea that maybe makes the best use of the resources you have. That's a really important skill. And I would say even in the age of AI, it's still most important to be a really good, clear, confident communicator. So yes, AI can write a great first draft for you, but you still have to know what a good draft looks like. And whether you're grant writing or you're writing an appeal letter, you still have to be able to bring that polish to it, that human touch that really makes it sing. Because there's so much content out there right now. So being able to bring something forward that really speaks to the experience of the community that you're serving, that brings that element that creates a connection with somebody else, because that's really what nonprofits and fundraising is all about, is building relationships, creating conversations that lead to action. So if you're a really good communicator, you're also going to do well in any realm of the nonprofit sector. I think it's also good to be really good with small talk and meeting facilitation. No matter your role, whether you're in finance or fundraising, there's a lot of meetings in nonprofits, and also just meetings with the community or supporters or potential beneficiaries. So much of the work is about making that connection and being authentic and bringing yourself to the table. So if you have any experience in another sector that's about building relationships, that's going to translate well. And then I would also say budget fluency. So my work is not in finance, but I spend a lot of time looking at budgets and how to translate them to a lay audience for donors or for the community. How do you make a story out of those numbers? When you're writing a grant, you have to be able to tell the numbers as a narrative. So that's really useful. And then emotional intelligence. I think I start my class in the fundraising certificate program with one whole night about getting comfortable with your relationship with money, just so you can talk to others about their money. So it's a lot of uncomfortable conversations, challenging people's deeply held values in some cases, talking to them about things from their past so that you can help them to show up and be a part of the mission of a nonprofit. So having very good emotional intelligence and ability to sit down with someone and connect, super important. And last thing I would say is a gap that people sometimes struggle with in a transition to nonprofits is having a need for structure and really defined roles. So that can be uncomfortable if you're used to that environment that's a little bit more structured. A lot of organizations, especially small ones, it's a lot of like making things up as you go. There's no defined role or structures, but you're building those systems as you go.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry, I might have dropped off for a moment there. My internet got kind of wacky, but I'm here. So apologies for that. I agree with everything Julie said, and especially everything she said was fantastic, and particularly around sort of being able to navigate change. I'll add a couple of other things. I think, as I alluded to or said before, I think being able to work across sectors is really important. And so the relationships piece that Julie talked about is critical no matter sort of what you're doing or who you're working with. But I think having the skill and ability to know that if you are sitting at a table as a nonprofit, you are likely wanting to engage or partner with other nonprofits, first of all. Also, public sector funding, particularly in Seattle, there's a lot of Seattle and King County, a lot of public sector funds goes to nonprofits, particularly human service organizations. So you need to be able to understand the interests and partner effectively with government folks. You also need to be able to understand the interests and partner effectively with the private sector folks, whether it's corporation that might be supporting you or wanting to do a project with you, or folks who work in the business world who may be on your board. And the other piece there is, I think, having the skills and ability to work well with boards and other volunteers. Unlike probably many jobs, if you are in leadership at a nonprofit, you probably have anywhere from 5 to 25 bosses called your board of directors. And so being able, as a leader or as someone who is in leadership in a nonprofit, being able to navigate that. And not only do you have 5 to 25 folks who are technically your bosses, but then they change every few years, right? And so that takes, I think, a unique set of skills and, again, tying to emotional intelligence and ability to form relationships, like what Julie was saying. The one gap, and this again builds on something Julie was saying, I think that one gap I would call out is if you are coming into the nonprofit sector from another sector, you'll want to be really attuned to both the culture and nonprofit sector, as the three of us have been saying, having this really unique mission-driven culture. And you also probably want to be attuned to the pace of the work. And it may depend on the nonprofit, but I know that when I was doing my direct service work early in my careers, and especially when I was at United Way doing nonprofit work, we had folks from the business community who thought we were moving way too slow as a nonprofit, and we had folks from government, including me, because I came into United Way from government, thinking, "Wow, this nonprofit moves so quickly." And so nonprofits move at the pace that they move at, but that pace can be unfamiliar or different. And that culture can be unfamiliar or different if you are coming from the public or the not or the private sector and entering into nonprofit work for the first time.
So, I will echo a lot of what has already been said by Julie and Sarah. What I think is unique for finance is that if you're, and I've heard this a lot, and it's probably one of my pet peeves because I started very young in my career working in finance in a nonprofit was, well, I'll just retire and go to a nonprofit and it'll be easier. And it's like, oh, that's cute. And so then they realize that it's not like it's a totally different ballgame, and you take accounting and you flip it on its head is kind of how I like to tell people, like, what you think you know, you actually don't know. But you know the basics of accounting. Accounting doesn't change, it's just how we apply it. And it doesn't, you don't close your books by the 5th of the month, because that would be lovely if we could do that, but that's not how grant funding works. And so just kind of understanding the different caveats that are there. And it's trying to get program people who don't have a finance background to understand the finance and the requirements of their grant, which may be different than the requirements of the grant that is their friend who's the program manager at the very next desk. And so it's people understanding you have a federal grant, so you can't purchase food, but they can purchase food because they have a different grant. And it's understanding and getting people to that. So I think it's that if you like rules, like nonprofit finance is the way to go. And if you really want the ability to help people make the best decision possible, you get that opportunity to communicate across. And I think, that was mentioned, like communication is key. And it's how do you communicate? And I think Julie mentioned like translating data from like what I know in accounting to what makes sense for people to understand is, what is the puzzle piece that we're trying to put together? Do we want these people to be 100% funded on this grant? Because if that grant goes away, then I don't have that person. Or do I want to move them into different percentages on different grants? And so I think if you have the ability to think outside of a box and look at this as like Tetris, a game of Tetris, putting it together, and there's always something falling off at the bottom, then you're actually able to help move this forward. I think one of the biggest gaps that I see when people transition in is that they want it to be the sector that they were in and they were comfortable with. And it's being comfortable with being uncomfortable and asking the question why, but not in a negative way, but really in a way of, I just don't understand. So I need you to help me understand. Help me understand why we do it here. Why do we do this way? Who benefits from that conversation? I have to deal with audit committees and finance committees, and when you work with corporation finance people, they have very different questions than my nonprofit, people on the other side. And so being able to answer both those questions and having the ability to communicate and having the ability to have a good relationship with an auditor, because your audit is, going to determine what is public. And so you really want to be able to have all of that written down.
That's a lot of great information. Thank you. So we're on to our last question, and perfect for the theme and title of tonight. So what advice would you give to professionals considering a transition into the nonprofit sector? I know a couple of you have already really touched on this a little bit, but maybe, Anne, we can start with you and start to take a little bit of a deeper dive.
Sure. So I mentioned it just a minute ago, but flexibility, curiosity, a willingness to continue learning, those are really understanding that you come in with a special set of skills, and figuring out how they translate versus a bull in a china closet. Like you want to come in and adapt to the environment that you're in, and understanding that you don't just go in and start asking for change, that you go in and you learn what's there and you work with them on what change can look like. Because in my experience, nonprofits are not super keen on people who are not part of their nonprofit coming in and making all of these demands for change when they haven't even bothered to learn the communities that they serve or the mission of the organization. So when you're mission driven, it's how does everything that we're doing benefit the mission? How does it benefit the community that we're serving? If we don't do this, how are we harming the community, or how are we creating a gap in service? How are we really able to function in a way that is being a good steward of the funds that we have and that's helping to move the mission forward? And so when you're looking at it, if the mission doesn't really jive with you, there's going to be a disconnect between you and the organization moving forward. And so I would recommend not going into an organization that you have a totally different either political opinion or religious opinion on, or anything like that, and really just focusing in on things that you too can be passionate about. You too can have that deep embedded sense of, I want to make this better. It's not just another job.
That's really, really good advice. You want me to jump in, Brian?
Yeah, that'd be great, Julie. Yeah, appreciate it.
I think getting the first job in the nonprofit sector is the toughest, which is probably true in a lot of sectors. But even if you've had many years of experience in another field, you still have to find a way to stand out to demonstrate that you have the commitment to nonprofit work, that you can make the leap and translate in the ways that Anne was just discussing. I think having volunteer experience in a similar role or an organization as one that you would like to work is a good way to demonstrate that you could make the leap, that you've been in a similar environment. I have some students in my courses who will volunteer at organizations, or they'll take on internship roles to get their foot in the door. And I would also say this has been true throughout my career, that it's a huge relationship-based field, as we've already said. So really leaning heavily into networking, and in the fundraising realm, that means showing up at the AFP events, the networking events. There's other nonprofit associations for each corner of the field. That makes a huge difference, because if somebody knows you, has met you, can carry conversation with you, you're more likely to get, to the top of the list for an interview. And then I would say, as far as figuring out where you might want to land first in the field, what I often did was look around on LinkedIn for other people who are already in similar roles that you would, aspire to be in eventually, and take a look at their journey. What are the types of jobs they got first to get to the point where they are now? And that can give you a sense of, oh, do I need other education? Do I need other volunteer experience to get into this type of work? And so even reaching out to people that you don't know, even a cold outreach for a meet and greet or an informational interview, can really be helpful when you're just dipping your toes in. And then I would say, I think this is similar to what Anne was saying, but just because you were at a level in a different sector, I wouldn't expect to enter at that same level of leadership or experience in this field if you don't have similar experience or education that sort of translates the work that you're doing into the nonprofit field. Some of the skills really do translate, but I think organizations are more likely to hire you if you have some experience or some education that gives you that credibility. And so that would be a good place to start if you're having a hard time getting traction. And I would also just say, finding a good mentor, even if they're not in the organization where you start your first job or second job. There are some places that have formal mentorship programs as part of the organization, or professional associations like AFP have formal mentorship programs. But that was one of the ways that I was able to early on figure out the ropes of nonprofit career advancement.
Great. It's so hard going third, because you both just said almost everything that I wanted to say. So 100% agree with what both of you said, both about sort of the shift from another sector to the nonprofit sector, and having passion for the mission. 100% believe in that, because the work is hard. And so you want to be doing hard work. You want to be working hard for a cause or an organization, doing work that you really believe in. That networking, the volunteering suggestion, all of that, 100% agree with that. I think the only thing that I will add, and I can do I hope this is okay, a little plug for the nonprofit certificate, nonprofit management certificate program. But I think, a program like that, I have so many students who are thinking about that transition, or in a nonprofit but newly in a nonprofit and want to learn more, and an opportunity to learn more. So whether it is a certificate program, which is, a really great way to sort of in 3 quarters, just learn so much, or just educating yourself. There's so much good writing and blog posts and TED Talks and all sorts of things that specifically talk about what leadership in the nonprofit sector is like, what volunteering is like, how specific management approaches translate or show up differently in the nonprofit sector. So in addition to all the things Anne and Julie said, I think that sort of education piece, whether it's something formal like a certificate program, or it's looking at what people are saying on LinkedIn, and finding the folks whose TED Talks and blogs and articles you want to follow and keep reading. Doing that, I think, is another great way of really making sure that you know what you're getting into, or if you've gotten into it, that you are sort of continually learning about what it is and how you can best show up.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, thank you very much, all 3 of you. This now is the time where we transition to the Q&A for folks that are joining us this evening. And we already have a few questions here, within the Q&A. And I wonder if we can take maybe this first one. I know there's already been a lot of great things that were said with this last question about advice for professionals transitioning from informational interviews to specific events. But I'm wondering if there's anything that anyone wants to just add a little bit more to the question: how do you recommend starting to make those connections with nonprofits you're interested in working for, right? What does that look like?
I can just say real quickly, the reason I got my first nonprofit job in Seattle right after college is that when I was in college, I had volunteered for this nonprofit. And I think if you have the time and capacity to volunteer at an organization whose mission, sparks joy in you or sparks interest in you, volunteering can be a great way. Not everybody is able to do that, and I recognize that, but that is one option.
I would say it's also in knowing people in nonprofits, just in general. That helps just kind of know if you're able to get an interview in those places, right? Really understanding what the culture is, because it's very different than a for-profit culture. It's very different than what I would consider like my experience at Boeing, or my experience working in a bookstore. Like any of those type of experiences are just really different. And so I think just knowing people that work for them and kind of being able to answer questions that aren't just factually related, but how you relate to any sort of mission, how you relate to the stories that are there and it's engaging with them too, knowing what they're up to, showing up if they have community events, right? Just being there and kind of making sure that you're involving yourself in that community, and you're not just shifting entirely because it's a different job and you want to go into that way.
I don't know, Julie, if you had anything to add with that.
I think we've covered it very deeply.
Yeah, that's great. We have another question about why nonprofit versus for-profit organizations. Why? When looking at that difference between the two.
I'm not sure the total context for that question, but I would say what we've all said: mission, mission, mission.
Right.
But I don't know if Anne or Julie have other takes.
I mean, I guess that I would answer a question with a question, which is what are you wanting? Like, because that would tell you whether it would be a nonprofit or a for-profit. If your goal is to make a lot of money, I don't know that like nonprofit is your jam. Like if that becomes, how fast can I climb a corporate ladder? I also don't know that nonprofit is the way to go. A lot of nonprofits that I have seen in the small to medium space, which is most nonprofits, they don't have tons of managers and senior managers and directors. And so there's not a huge career ladder going up. So it's more of a question for a question, is if you want a lot of upward mobility or you want a lot of people, nonprofit might not be the thing for you. In some places it's fine. I mean, higher education is also a nonprofit, so maybe that's a little bit different, but I think it just depends on what you want, would be my answer to that.
Yeah, I was going to add that really nonprofit versus for-profit is really just a tax status. And so the deeper question is what type of culture you want to work in, what at the end of the day, what do you want your benefits to be? In some ways, a benefit could be being a part of this bigger movement that you're really passionate about. And so, yes, at the end of the day, maybe your take-home pay doesn't look quite the same, although I would argue that you can make a pretty good living in nonprofits, especially if you're at a larger organization like a hospital or a university. So it's not necessarily choosing only between what your salary looks like. I think it's also looking at the bigger picture of your work-life balance, your overall life mission of what are you trying to do with all your time every day. And in some ways that might lead you to the nonprofit sector, and there might be a for-profit company that's doing mission-driven work in a different way. So I think it's more about what are you, as you said, prioritizing.
Yeah, that's great reframing. We have another question here. I currently volunteer with the Tau Beta Pi's new Engineering for Tomorrow Nest Development Committee, which fosters leadership and teamwork among engineering students through real-world challenges. This year's focus is on resource scarcity. I've struggled to recruit TPP alumni willing to share their expertise and assemble student teams from CLU and UW to participate. I welcome any suggestions on how to better engage volunteers, both TPP alumni and students.
I would say that I'm seeing this in a lot of small organizations right now, that there's a lot of challenge around recruiting volunteers, especially anyone under the age of 60, not in a retirement time of life. I think there's just a lot of competition for attention in our lives right now, more so than ever before. And I do see a lot of organizations not able to fill the same volunteer roles that they've had for decades. So I think it's that creativity that we were talking about. I think a lot of nonprofits are at a place where they need to rethink their traditional volunteer roles. Could they be, more flexible for somebody to do a piece of a job that used to be, one person's full-time volunteer role? Is there something that you can carve off that fits somebody's limited time, but also fits their expertise? So there's a longer explanation here, but I think what you're experiencing could be a symptom of what many organizations are experiencing, with a shift in the way that we all think about our time and volunteering.
That's great.
Can
Thanks, Julie.
can I
Oh,
add to
go
that
ahead.
real
Please
quick
do.
too?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I again 100% agree. I would also, and this may not be possible, it also may be controversial, but I think, offering, depending on what the scope of the work is, and how long you need someone in that volunteer role, student in that volunteer role, offering a stipend, which maybe then makes them not a volunteer, but a stipend, an honorarium, some kind of sort of monetary incentive, perhaps, if that's possible for your organization, might help. And then the other thing I've seen, that works, that could help with recruitment, and I've seen it help, I've seen it hinder recruitment, is being really, really clear about what the role is that you want and what the scope is, and having like the most well-written, job announcement or volunteer position posting that is super, super clear about this many hours, this is the type of work, this is the reward, and not necessarily monetary reward, but you will be, you will get the opportunity to, help this community or do this, kind of mission driven thing. And the more clear and concise you can be in that description might also help folks like be able to imagine, oh yes, this only requires 2 hours a week. It's to do this and it's for this bigger cause. Yes, I can see myself doing that.
That's great. Thanks for that, Sarah. So here's another question. You mentioned people retiring and switching to nonprofit. Do you find age-related bias that exists in the corporate world is similar in the nonprofit community? It's a great
I'm
question.
the one that said that. It's a good question. I think it's an interesting shift because I see it on both sides. So there's the new Gen Z, or I don't know what generation we're on in hiring anymore, but like the younger ones that are coming in, and the older ones that that are still in the nonprofit sector, or they want to come into the nonprofit sector. I haven't seen it where it's happening, and I do HR for the smaller organizations where they're like, we don't want to hire them because they're older. I would say my comment was more related to people retiring and coming into nonprofit as a second career. Instead of really understanding the nonprofit background and coming in. And so I don't see that. But I do think, and I can't remember if it was Julie or Sarah mentioned, you may not come in at the same level that you were at in your other career. And it's just making sure that you're willing to take that cut, and that you're willing to maybe not be at the CEO level or the CFO level, and that you're willing to kind of come in as a mid-level person to do that work. And so I've seen that, and I've kind of seen it across the board.
That's great. We have some like tactical advice potentially here that we can provide. So are there any differences in nonprofit job applications and for-profit job applications, or differences in interview questions that one would expect?
We're interviewing people now. We have some job openings that are there. I would say I still want people to answer using like the Smarty method or the STAR method. Like, I want people to answer in that same kind of way. But I want their answers to be related to the mission, and I want their answers to be related to what I want them to do, always keeping in mind the end goal of the organization. And so we're not making widgets to sell, and it's not how much can I sell them for. It's how are you going to integrate into the organization and into the community that we serve? That seems to be something that all of us, when we're asking questions, at least in my experience, is that question is how are you going to bring something into us to help move the mission forward? So I think we've said mission like 1,700 times tonight. How are we going to move that forward all the time?
I'm often in the role of advising organizations who are hiring positions. And I would say something that I see often happening is several rounds of interviews with different decision makers in the organizations. That's similar in some ways to corporate, but the type of people who are coming into those conversations are like board members. If you're hiring a development director, who are asking, how are you going to work with me as a volunteer, or the executive director saying, here's the situation, tell me exactly what you would do in this situation. So there's a very practical culture, I think, in nonprofit interviews, where it's like, we're not going to beat around the bush. Tell us how you would help us to raise money, or tell us how you would, here's our situation, here's our actual volunteer who you would be partnering with, how are you going to work with them? So I think it's very focused in that way on like, let's get to work.
The only thing I would add to that too is, again, this is where like that point about the nonprofit sector is so vast and diverse. So there are large institutions that are nonprofit that probably have really complex bureaucratic hiring processes. And then there are smaller grassroots nonprofits that might hire you after one interview, or it's you have coffee and then you and then you get hired. I mean, not that it's, you have to go through certain legal steps, obviously, but like that what's going to happen and how complex and bureaucratic the process is might also depend on the size of the organization. And yes, to what both Julie and Ann said too.
That's great. Have you noticed any trends in arts or nonprofits specifically? And do you have any recommendations for people interested in arts management? So the music and music in particular, in that particular sector of the nonprofits?
I would say that there's more and more of a specialization in leadership roles. So there's programs, I think, at both University of Washington and I also teach at Seattle University that are focused on nonprofit arts leadership and management. So it's definitely being recognized as a specialization. I think there's just as much as in other areas of the sector, even if you came up into those leadership roles as an artist, there's still a high value, high priority placed on can you read the budget? What are your leadership skills around, marshaling volunteers? And so having, all those backgrounds that we've talked about, fundraising, finance, volunteer management, are important even above your passion and knowledge of the particular area of arts, I would say.
That's great. This is a good one to, pick back up on some of the topics that have come up in terms of being able to operate, um, with a lot of ambiguity. And the question is, how has the nonprofit sector been impacted by economic instability in the past? So, right, when there may be some, additional precarity going on now.
That's fun. Right now, I would say, and we've had it in the past, right? We've had economic downturns, and we've had financial crashes, and we've had just we've seen it, right? We've seen it in the nonprofit sector where grants are reduced. What we haven't seen to this level is the instability in federal funding. And that has created a drastic shift in how we plan and how we operate. The organization I'm at currently has a 5-year grant that we're supposed to start year 3 on 9/30, and we still haven't heard if we can do that or not. We've had grants that have been taken and then they're back and then they're gone again, and the requirements around them have just gotten pretty insane. And so I don't know, and I hate the word unprecedented times, but I feel like that is exactly what we are in. And I think we can always plan financially for, economic downturn, and that's part of good financial planning. But I do think we're in a very different world than we were, where more organizations are going to um, different foundations, and everybody is applying for the same pot of money in a very different way than we have before. And I think Julie can probably talk about this a little bit more, is that all of the donors are even more tapped. And as the dollars get smaller for the middle class in particular, those kind of mid donors become harder to get recurring donor gifts from. And so I don't think it's going to get easier yet. And so I just think it's going to be kind of up and down for the next few years. But Julie would
Yeah.
probably have more.
So much to say about that we probably can't sum up in 2 minutes, but I would briefly say that for grant applications, we're hearing foundations are receiving 3 or 4 times as many applications, fierce competition, but this is leading many nonprofits to say, oh, we need to diversify our funding sources. We're not seeing as much on the federal front. It's really competitive in private foundations. So we're seeing more interest in let's build out our individual giving program, which is great. That really does help with sustainability. So there is, I think, actually a bigger demand right now for fundraisers, with organizations trying to be creative and trying to expand. But there's also a whole nother segment of organizations that are on the brink of not surviving because they were so reliant and didn't diversify soon enough in terms of their funding sources. And so if you're in one of those organizations, and I have many in my mind who are right on the edge, yeah, job security isn't looking great. But if you're an organization that has planned well and diversified, or you're on the road to diversifying your funding, I think it is a pretty stable place to be, even despite all the noise right now in the funding environment.
That's great. Thanks so much, for all those great questions. We still have a few more that are in the Q&A, but alas, we're running out of time here. So I'm going to transition here quickly just to say that, again, we have two new nonprofit specializations that are launching this particular fall, one on budget and finance, another one on grant management, and that really kind of completes this larger constellation of specializations from the grant writing to the management to the budgeting of finance. And then Sarah started this a little bit earlier, a plug definitely for both of our longtime nonprofit certificates, one the nonprofit management certificate and another one for the fundraising management certificate. Both have fall starts coming up here very shortly. And with that, I wanted to say, again, thanks for joining us tonight. And to keep learning with us, we have another Expert Insights webinar coming up in October on the topic of AI and instructional design. That will be October 15th from 6 to 7 p.m. You can stay connected with us by subscribing to our email list to receive event info, career tips, industry trends, program information, and much, much more. And then obviously, navigating to pce.uw.edu to see all of our programs and more information. And so with that, I wanted to say thank you, everyone, for joining tonight. Thank you very much to our presenters. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Anne, for everything you do for our students, everything you do for our program, and most importantly, everything you do for our communities. Thanks so much, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Take care.